Are you ready for the call to be a spiritual first responder? Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza, and this week Michael Lindfield joins the podcast again to talk about being a spiritual first responder. Do you have what it takes to answer the call? All right, if you like this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Now here's the call, and back to the podcast. Recently, there's been a 4-alarm, not a fire, but an earthquake in Turkey, which brought up, we covered this stuff in a previous episode called Soulquake. I know you're going to speak about that, and we've seen the kind of the world focus and send first responders. And you mentioned, how do we be like a spiritual first responder? How do we keep ourselves in that state where we're ready to respond to the call when it comes?
Yeah, you're right. The earthquake this past week in Turkey and northern Syria, 7.8, aftershock 7.5. That's a whole lot of shaking going on there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really is. Because you and I have been in earthquakes. I've been in a 7.2 in San Francisco, and I know what that feels like, 7.8. Wow. And then they're predicting at some point up in the Pacific Northwest a 9.0.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the impermanence of form, we've covered that in other podcasts, but also the Agni Yoga teachings say there is a direct correlation between psychic tension in the world and earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that the earthquakes happen in regions where there have been, maybe for quite a number of years, maybe thousands of years or hundreds of years, tensions. And so it breaks apart, it cracks, and the earth is always changing and shifting and moving. However, we add to the strains and stresses through the tensions that we place in the field. So I'm not saying that the people there caused it. I'm just saying that all of our collective psyche and the tension in the field and the polarities, they all add up to increased stress on the ecosystem of Gaia. So we mentioned earthquakes, and then in May 22nd, 2022, we did a podcast on Soulquake. And I think it'd be interesting just to recap what that said, because there were 3 basic tips of what to do in a soulquake. And for those of you who haven't yet listened to that podcast, a soulquake is when you say yes to the soul and it says, okay, right, ready or not, here I come. And it shakes you, and it shakes you, and it shakes loose everything that isn't who you are, everything that isn't really an expression and a true rendition of your inner beauty and truth. And it shakes you to the core. It has you stop and recalibrate. And sometimes, if your life is so out of kilter, it can even reduce your life to rubble, in the same way that we saw buildings reduced to rubble in southern Turkey and northern Syria. It's that devastating. But the good news is a soulquake is a positive upheaval in our lives. Nobody's doing anything to us. We have invoked change. And if we are going to break up some of the crystallized thought forms, whether they're beliefs or behaviors, whatever it is that's still crystallized and not able to respond to the soul, once we've said yes to life, the soulquake happens to align us. And that alignment is coming into resonance. Now, the resonance is a note. And when that note hits our particular personality vehicle, if it's not truly resonating with the soul, it will shake it. I'm thinking in the Bible how they destroyed Jericho. They walked around the city 7 times and blew trumpets. Well, guess what you can do with the power of sound and intentionality and ritual? So when ritualistically you say yes to the soul, be prepared for a cleansing and a purificatory process to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So we said in an earthquake, you know, those of us who've lived through and with earthquakes for a number of years know that you stay put for what you make sure you go under a part of the structure that you hopefully you know to be sound. It may be a doorway or something, but you just don't run out into the street any old how. But if you can get into open ground, yes, etc. We know earthquake preparedness. So here's what we said for the tips: how to prepare for a soul quake. The first one is, in a soul quake, we don't run for cover. We stand in the unshakable stillness and security of the higher self. And that goes back to one of the principles we work with here at Meditation Mount, which is the principle of essential divinity. That inside of us is this note of the Creator, is this flame, this eternal flame, this our particular particle of the Creator that lives at the heart of who we are. So our identity can never be destroyed. But the forms that our identity occupies in the temporal world, those are open to change, sometimes drastic change. So the idea is, in a soul quake, rather than trying to run and patch up the forms that are being shaken up, you stand in the absolute stillness of your essential nature, your essential divinity, because that is your place of refuge. Refuge, not to hide out, but refuge in the spiritual sense of you take refuge, you stand in the only place that offers security, which is that which can never be destroyed, which is the spark of the Creator, the monadic fire, whatever you want to call it, the fire of love that burns at the heart of who we are. And so that was the first tip. And then we said the second tip in Soulquake is, we don't hoard or hold on to things. We let go of all baggage, belongings, and beliefs that no longer serve us.
Mm.
So this is one of the things about not being attached to form. And we've actually been focusing on this the last couple of podcasts with the impermanence of form, non-attachment, the whole thing of how to be in the world but not of it, how to live in the world but not be attached to the forms of the world, but use the forms of the world to express the desire that lives inside us, which is the call of the soul to show up. And so this whole thing of letting go of the beliefs, it's part of the breaking up of the crystallization. So we are actually working with the soul quake process by not holding on as we're getting shaken. We're allowing ourselves to be liberated. We're allowing ourselves to be dissolved and then resolved. And then the third tip that we offered is, in a soul quake, we don't practice survival. We enter the fiery crucible of a transformative process that eventually leads to renewal and thrival. So it's another version of what I've just said. We're not there to survive, i.e. the form, although it may be useful to have your physical form survive and not die because you may have work left to do. You haven't fulfilled your mission. There's still stuff to do. And therefore, we do take care of the physical, but we're not attached to it as our source of identity. So that's one of the things that we talked about in a soul quake. And that came up because of the recent earthquakes. So the whole idea of, what does it mean to be a spiritual first responder? I had a very vivid experience of this many years ago. I was living in the Findhorn community in northern Scotland, and the nearest town, the local town, was Forres. It's in Morayshire. It's up next to the Highlands. And I was teaching a course, and I looked at the date, and I worked out that day that I was teaching was exactly my 33 and a third birthday.
Mm.
And 33 and a third always has a special meaning from a numerological standpoint. It has to do with ending of cycles. It has to do with death. It has to do with rebirth. And I thought, well, this is interesting because I was giving a talk about death. So we had a lunch break and I walked down to the local town because we have had our center up on a hill looking over the town. So I walked down to the town and I had to go and pick up a pair of shoes that were being repaired. So I went into the shoe shop and I came out with the parcel under my arm and stood waiting to cross the road. And a woman was right next to me. And suddenly she walked out into the middle of the road and a motorcycle came and hit her and just whacked. And that was it. She was on the ground. She was bleeding. The motorcyclist, of course, was thrown from the motorcycle and was lying and going through, agony just very nearby. Another person who was in the street was a nurse. She immediately rushed over to the motorcyclist to help him because that was her skill. I immediately knew I had to be with this woman. Cradle her in my arms. She was bleeding. She died. My job was to help her leave or understand that you are now no longer incarnated. So my role as a first responder was not to preserve the form. She'd already died. She went through the process of dying. It didn't take more than half a minute. And then there I was with a person who probably, because it happened so quickly, was in shock. She didn't know what hit her. Literally, she didn't know what hit her. She never saw the motorcycle coming. Mm. So I spent quite a bit of time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, just holding her, reassuring her that she was safe. She didn't have a body anymore, but her consciousness was safe, and then gave her some directions of how to let go and how to move and begin your journey. But that was one of those days I'll always remember because death was in the air, not as a morbid cloud hanging over the town of Forest, but as a reality, as it always is a reality. The Don Juan books is like death is always on your left shoulder. It's your companion. And so you always have death and life as your companions. But for me, that was my first experience of, that was what it means to be a spiritual first responder, because this person needs help. They're stuck. And then in a similar way, you have people who are very skilled at helping people die. There was a woman who came to visit Meditation Mount this past week, and she gave me her card. She was a death doula. Her job was to help with graceful transitions, just as we have midwives who come to help with a natural childbirth. This is, how do you die naturally and gracefully? So she was a spiritual first responder, or it's like hospice. So hospice care is preparing you for the journey you're about to take. So I thought that what we need, as well as people sorting through the rubble and pulling injured people out and finding people buried in earthquakes in Turkey and northern Syria, we also need for us to direct our psychic, our spiritual energy towards that part of the world and have deep conversation with those souls that some of them are still in shock. They don't know that they died. They're in limbo, literally in limbo. So we can help by sending them loving thoughts, because they're our sisters and brothers. They're no longer incarnated, but they're still our sisters and brothers in the human family. Our human family comprises millions and millions and millions of units of consciousness, only some of which are incarnated at any one time. So, that really got me thinking, Joey. And it's like, wow, there's more we could say about, how to leave gracefully. But I just wanted to just lay that out as there is another dimension to first response, which is this deeper helping a person understand what's happening to them. And if they've lost their incarnated form, they are no longer an incarnated being. How do you help them return to source?
Mm.
How do you be resourceful for them as they need to return to source? And so there's some things I can talk about later, but I just wondered from your perspective, what did the earthquakes bring up for you when you saw this? Because you talked about a particular video that you saw that touched you.
Yeah, it was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. It was there was two videos. One was of like, I think a taxi cab driver who had a dash cam, and he happened to, everything started shaking, and he stopped in the middle of the road, and you can just see building after building on both sides of the road coming down until finally a bunch of rubble hits his car and the camera goes out. And then the second was this recovery video, and they found this little girl and her sister in the rubble. She was trapped, and she was kind of protecting her sister. They was in a small space, and I mean, she was so calm. The little girl who was the older sister, she was so calm. It was almost unnerving. It was very interesting to see, and it got me thinking of what is it about tragedy, or what is it about like these conflicts, war, that for some reason bring out our better angels, our better humanity, and it saw like instantly different nations sent over recovery teams.
Right.
When which brings up a second question of why can't we maintain that when there's not a war, when there's not a tragedy? Why can't we continue to look after each other in that same manner?
Excellent question. I mean,
Yeah.
we need to ponder on that collective. You're absolutely right. But the fact that this girl was protecting her younger sister, when I offer help to somebody else, I don't think about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, I'm protected because I'm helping somebody else, and therefore I am being helped. That's the whole thing we touched on before. The way to receive is to give. Give, give, give. This girl was giving of herself to protect her sister. Therefore, life was protecting her to the degree that it was able to.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very powerful. And I think what you're touching on is, why do we suddenly have this outflow of compassion and support and in times of tragedy? Because it brings home life and death. And also it calls forth the innate goodness of our humanity. Now, there are some people in some particular religious affiliations that believe that we are basically evil or sinners, and et cetera, et cetera. I go back to an understanding that the Greeks had, that inside of us is this holy trinity of truth, goodness, and beauty. So we are innately good people. Our task, every incarnation, is to create the vehicle that can do justice to that fact. So at the moment, we are in a developmental phase as individuals and nations where we probably are in early adolescence. We haven't reached maturity. Maturity is the ability to express the soul openly, lovingly, free from selfishness. And it's a developmental thing. And tragedies can speed up the evolution of consciousness. It's a tough way to do it, but as we said before, the earth is called the classroom of hard knocks.
Mm-hmm.
The pedagogical approach of earth is pain and suffering. Pain tells you, ouch, don't do that. Suffering is, I feel very bad. Why do I feel bad? Because I've just done this, or this has just been done to me. Well, exactly as you said, well, how do we ensure that it doesn't happen? How do we ensure that we don't live this way? And only when tragedy really strikes do our better angels show up as these first responders. Why can't our better angels govern? And that really is the question that we're facing in the world at the moment, is our better angels are not governing our own personal lives, our national lives. But when they do, when the overriding soul of a nation, when my soul is the government that is really in charge, And because it's charged with bringing love and compassion to all around. Until we've reached that point, we're going to be living in a state of world affairs that is pretty violent. Until we've understood that. So I mean, that's a really poignant, powerful question to ask now. Is like, why do we have to wait for a tragedy to behave as we should have been behaving all along? Wow. So I go back to, what does it mean to be a spiritual first responder? We can do it at different levels. As I say, now we can actually, through the power of our thoughts and the compassion in our heart, we can direct that energy. Remember, energy follows thought. We've touched on this probably every other podcast. We can actually send our thoughts and our healing salve, our healing balm of compassion to those who are suffering. Now, it won't take away their physical pain, but it will at a deeper level provide the salve of reassurance that on the deepest level, everything is okay. Because you still are. You may not have a body, but you still exist. It's the continuity of consciousness. So we go back to how do you help people do the transition? And another thing that people have been familiar with for centuries is like ghosts. I grew up in England. There are always haunted houses, and there's always, I live near a haunted house. And there's a story of a woman coming on a balcony and holding a child, and from the sort of the 16th century. And because she was mourning the loss of her baby, and so people talk about haunted houses and ghosts, and they don't understand what ghosts are. A ghost is a person who's lost their body, who hasn't realized they're dead and still attached and hasn't let go. So one of the jobs of a spiritual first responder when you meet a ghost is to say, maybe it's time to let go. You actually have got a ticket somewhere else. You're already booked on a flight out of here. Let go. Get on board. Take that flight home. And one of the things I was reflecting on, because, when we fly between continents now and fly across the country, they always offer these in-flight movies. So what I want to let people know is, look, when you leave this incarnation and when you are ready to board the flight home, on the journey back to Source, there is this amazing in-flight movie that's provided. And guess what? You star in it. So the in-flight movie on the journey back to Source into the subtle realms is a review of your life. Okay? And then you get to look at it and go, whoa. And actually you get to edit it as you go along, not edit it to change what happened and it happened, but what you get to edit is your future response to things like this. So you begin to create a new narrative. So you learn from your lessons. So one of the things is, there is an in-flight movie on the journey home. And some of it may be joyful. Some of it could be painful if I'm still, ouch, ooh, did I really do that? But then this is a chance to sit back and give yourself some forgiveness. And with the guides that are helping you process, it's a debrief. It's an after-action review, just like the army, because I've worked with some of the military. And when they've come back from some sort of event, they do an after-action review, an AAR. What do we intend? What happened? And how can we improve on what we do next time? And that's basically what you're doing when you're going back to source. You're saying, okay, this event just happened. It was called my life. It was called this incarnation. Okay, so let's do an after-action review. And there are ways of preparing for this so it doesn't become a shock. And oh my God, did I really live a life like that? The Tibetan, who is the person who dictated the spiritual teachings to Alice Bailey and is part of our lineage, he gives a practice that you can do each day to prepare yourself for the in-flight movie and the review process. He says it's called the evening review. So at the end of each day, before you go to bed, you reflect on the day going backwards from right now. So here I am, sitting in a chair, ready to go to bed. I am sitting in the chair. And then I go back to, all the way back to the morning. And I view it as if I were the soul, or some people view it as if I were a wise being. You look at your life in review and how I would have acted if I'd been wiser. So this is a way of saying, okay, this was an unskilled way of living today. What would a skilled way look like? So that next day, I've just implanted some sagacity into the field. That I'm a little wiser because of that. So this evening review is your after-action review at a mini level. It's a daily after-action review. So you're ready for the big one. So that's another part of preparing. So one of the tasks now that are coming is this spiritual first responder, the death doulas, just as we have midwives to welcome people into the earth, into earthly life. We have death doulas that help you leave gracefully. So this is this cycle. It's like an airport. There are arrivals and departures all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, arrivals outnumber departures. It's called population explosion. But it's like, I don't want to reduce it to sort of crass terms like it's an airport.
Mm-hmm.
But you can imagine that there's always people to help you to check in and to check out.
That's true.
So if you checked out, okay, this is where you go. If you're checking in, welcome to Earth. And here are your parents, and they're going to take care of you until you can stand on your own feet. And oh, by the way, now it's time to leave. Oh, and the good news is when you arrive back into the subtle realms, there's going to be an amazing reception committee. All your friends are waiting for you to welcome you back. And they say in the teachings that birth is a lonelier time than death. Because when we arrive, we are packaged.
Right.
As Alan Watts said, the skin-encapsulated ego.
Yeah.
But it's a very tiny capsule,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have the capacity at that time to speak,
Mm-hmm.
to make ourselves known, to make sense of the world. We are still landing, and therefore it's a time of estrangement in one respect, because we are still coming from source into this world, and it takes a while to adjust and to gain the skills of saying, oh, okay, this is who I am, this is what's going on. And so it can be a very lonely time. Whereas death, it says, it's a reunification. We're reunited with people we know, and it's the continuity of consciousness. It's this continuous cycle through the white hole of birth and the black hole of death. And it cycles through continuously. These are the cycles that we go through as the soul learns its lessons and builds on earth a vehicle that can express everything. So we need spiritual first responders to help people who are stuck in the process. Because the worst thing to do is to hang on and get stuck, because we know being stuck and holding on blocks the circulatory flow. And circulation of energy, the free flow of energy around a system, is the hallmark of health. And so when you die, you've got to let go, because if you hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride, or you'll end up attached. So how do we let go and liberate ourselves? What we're talking about today is not just how do we help people who have been the victims of a disaster. We're talking about how do we help each other enter and leave a situation, a project, a lifetime. And we have to do that with love and compassion and skill, with wisdom. So it's loving wisdom in action. And so for me, if you want to earn your badge as a spiritual first responder, you really have to, first of all, look at your own life and how you are holding your relationship to your soul, to form. Because if I don't have a clean and clear relationship with that, with death, how can I help somebody else?
Mm.
And you and I have mentioned this before, that it may be useful each day to declare, this is a good day to live, this is a good day to die. This is basically a good day. We can make it a good day, the best possible day. Live this day as it were thy first. Live this day as it were thy last. I think this is why I think I'm moved to speak in this way today, is because tragedy brings death knocking on our own door.
Mm.
And are we afraid of death and hide from it? Or do we just say it is the cessation of form, but not the cessation of life?
And I've mentioned this podcast before, but on a much smaller scale. Within the last year, Kelly and I, we had a dog we had to transition, and for me, it was a very profound experience because we had effectively was a death doula. The vet came to our house, and I got to hold her in my arms while she transitioned, and I really actually felt her energy leave, and it completely changed my whole perspective on death. I mean, I'd never really been a person that was afraid of death, but I was sincerely and deeply now not afraid, because as I actually felt her energy leave her body, and I felt it wrap around me and then get as big as the room and then just gently dissipate, and it was striking. So I can understand how we can help create a peaceful atmosphere for people transitioning, even if it's not someone necessarily in our current field.
Right.
We're all connected.
Yes, and there are techniques. The Buddhists have a wonderful process for how do you accompany somebody traveling through the bardo?
Mm-hmm.
How do you sit with them for 40 days? The Jewish tradition has a way of sitting.
Yeah, sitting Shiva.
Sitting Shiva with people.
Mm-hmm.
Most traditions that have a depth to them understand what it means to accompany somebody as they're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are so freaked out by their death and so distraught, you're actually holding them back. Oh my God, why did you have to die? Well, that isn't a helpful question for them at the moment. It may be a question you want to ask yourself, but at the moment, they need to know that they're free and clear.
Yeah, that's a very important part, because it's not something you necessarily think about, but there's almost a bit of selfishness to not letting them go.
Exactly, and we don't realize that.
Yeah.
And we think that it's mourning them.
Right.
Well, it is. What does mourning mean? Does it mean regretting that they're dead? It means having these deep feelings of connection with another person and love. And then there's the loss of they are not there in a physical form anymore. But if I start to exaggerate that, it becomes like an anchor that I've attached to them. They need buoyancy.
Yeah.
I got to cut the ties, not cut the ties of my love and compassion, but cut the ties of attachment. And that's tough. I'm not saying you can do it on the first day sometimes it takes a long time to cut ties. I know even with the divorce, it may take years to finally feel that, I'm not held back by what happened in the past. And the same with death. When somebody dies, we grieve, we mourn. And here at the Mount, we've had over the years, celebration of life, where people come to celebrate somebody's life. It's a mourning, but it's also giving thanks for what this person has contributed to our lives, to the lives of their family, their community. And therefore, it's a celebration. And with a celebration, you're honoring the goodness, and you're also honoring the eternal nature of somebody. You're honoring what we call here the essential divinity of somebody, that lives on. So we've got a lot to learn on this planet, living in these dense bodies. It's not easy to detach when we've become so attached because we have emotional relationships with people. And those emotional relationships are full of feelings and full of love and sometimes full of sorrow, sadness. We got to sort that out at some point so that what remains is just this wonderful glow of love and connection that we have with a person, and we've let go and redeemed the baggage.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about death. You and I pack for travel. When we pack a case or we pack a backpack and off we go. When you die, it's the only journey where you have to unpack.
Oh, yeah.
No bags allowed. No baggage from before you.
That's it. Yeah,
Got to
that's true.
travel naked.
Right.
I hold it that way. So when it's time for me to leave, it isn't, oh God, what have I got to take with me? No, what have I got to let go of?
Mm.
Let go with gratitude, not throw it away, but say, okay, I release this, thank you. And then the in-flight movie will tell you what else needs to be let go of. And by the way, it's a free movie.
Right. That's nice. You have to pay for the Wi-Fi.
Don't have to pay. Well, actually, no, but the headsets.
Yeah, the headsets will get you. It also kind of reframes for me the whole idea of I don't know if you've done their Irish wake, where it's it's more of a celebration instead of and it definitely gives you and also kind of a Viking funeral kind of gives you a different perspective on going out.
Well, that's right, and that's where some people, different parts of the world, with cremation, you'll have a funeral pyre. I've seen in India. I've been to watch where they burnt somebody by the Ganges and then sprinkled their ashes and in the river, the holy river. So to go and watch somebody's body being burnt because fire purifies. And then there are people who really don't quite know what should I be buried? Should I be cremated? And I know there are people who've gone through that. It's a personal choice. I'm choosing to be cremated. And one of the reasons is because if I die with some disease in my body, I'm putting that back into the earth. And so what we do is we fill the earth with a lot of diseases and things that fire could purify. Now, what I've known in the sort of the brief understanding that I've gained from the Ageless Wisdom teachings is that to the degree that you still have emotional issues, it's a very painful process of cremation, going through this fire, if you still have got a lot of stuff to redeem. So one of the things, if you're going to be cremated, I would strongly advise working on any emotional attachments now, because it's more than just Velcro or ripping off a plaster from your skin. I've been told, so it says in the books, that it can be a very painful process, because it's up to us to bring ourselves to a point of liberation where we can dance with the fire, dance in the fire, be consumed by the fire. And that's it. It's a purificatory fire. I know we're getting a little technical here, and people are wondering, wow, well, you've gone off on a tangent here, but it's all part of, am I equipped to live? Am I equipped to die? Am I equipped to be a human being who spends part of their existence without a body and part of their existence with a body? It's called incarnation. We tend to forget. Just as I remember going back to when I was helping to run a garden school at Findhorn in Scotland, when a group of students came, and I took them round and I pointed to a particular large tree. It was a sycamore tree. And I said, how big is that tree? And then the students were telling me how tall they thought it was. And I sort of said, no. I said, I'll give you a hint. I asked you how big it was, not how tall it was. And so I said, oh, right, the roots. I said, yeah. What we don't always take into consideration, that the whole of that being has a visible and invisible component. So do we. So I think it's important that we understand the fullness of who we are, and it cycles through forms and formlessness. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. Then we're going to get stuck in the forms, and then we've constructed our own prison. So the duty of a spiritual first responder is liberation. Helping a person liberate and be free from the shock and the attachment to a form. I mean, that's a high level assignment. if you like. So if we were to teach first aid, spiritual first aid, you do that. And you teach how to help people release, liberate, let go. You'd also teach them as part of that how to safeguard themselves during their lives, how to protect themselves psychically, how to make sure that they live a clean life. Spiritual hygiene. What does spiritual hygiene mean? Well, we know now with COVID, they keep telling us, wash your hands, wash your hands. I'd love people to understand spiritual hygiene. Maybe that's a podcast we could do at some point.
Yeah, perhaps.
Spiritual hygiene. But anyway, Joey, that's what comes up for me when we talk about how do we respond to disasters, particularly how do we respond to disasters as spiritual beings?
Yeah, that's excellent because that's a perspective we don't necessarily consider all the time. And that was a beautiful way to wrap that up. I mean, I many things in there that I had not considered, but I really feel like that's and oftentimes when we feel helpless and we in the face of these tragedies, this is actually a way that you can reframe it.
You can, and it's not just, oh, this is fantasy. And I'm not here to convince anybody about anything anymore, as I've said. So you don't have to believe me, but at least consider it as a possibility that you're a soul and that you incarnate and you leave and you come back. And if that's not part of your belief, so be it. That's fine. Not a problem. I'm talking about what we've been given through the ageless wisdom teachings. And it tells you how to prepare for death. It tells you how to set up the room, have an orange light, have sandalwood incense, because sandalwood helps to break the attachment to form. So some things that people have learned over time that you do. And it's just that. It's how do you prepare the environment to either receive somebody or to let them go? And then, as you said before, what happens in the middle between arrival and departure? We got to figure that one out.
Right. That's definitely a work in progress.
We've got to figure that out. Now, do we live as a soul-inspired, soul-infused life in between arrivals and departures? So do we create a society built on love? So that's it. Anyway, I wish all of us can learn greater skills of being a spiritual first responder, because as this whole world is breaking up right now before our very eyes, it is going to be needed more than ever before. So please, guys, sign up as spiritual first responders.
All right. Thank you.
That's
great. That was great. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Jerry.